guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvelous video. This time, all xenomorphs, ever. There's hardly a cinematic monster that's as animalistic, aggressive, and beastly as the xenomorphs. These perfect organisms, the epitome of terror, the xenomorphs, have continued to haunt humans since their inception in 1979. While the naturally born xenomorphs are divided into castes such as drones, praetorians, queens, etc., there are other forms of xenomorphs such as neomorphs, hybrid xenomorphs, and artificially made xenomorphs. Additionally, these beasts of wonder and terror have appeared in movies, comics, novels, games, and as action figures. And in this video, we'll explore all 97 of these beasts. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Praetomorph. The Latin word prey is the English equivalent of the word pre. Naturally, the praetomorph is a hint that this xenomorph was basically a cousin to the xenomorphs, or at least the first of its kind. The praetomorph first appeared in the 2017 film Alien Covenant. In the movie, Captain Oram shoots down a neomorph which enrages the synthetic David, played by Michael Fassbender. David then tricks Oram into following him through his workshop and into a chamber filled with ovomorphs. It wasn't before long that Oram was impregnated and a Praeto chestburster took birth. This chestburster grew rapidly within the span of a few hours, and its first victim was a man named Cole, who had come looking for Captain Oram. Later, the beast went after the crew of Covenant on the cargo lifter, but was eventually injured and defeated by Daniels. However, a new praetomorph found itself on Covenant because a man named Lope had been previously impregnated. This new praetomorph attacked and killed 2 more crew members before being lured into the terraforming bay, where Tennessee and Daniels successfully impaled the creature using a terraforming truck. The praetomorph finally flew out of the Covenant to its much-awaited death. As far as its physical features are concerned, the praetomorphs are somewhat different to the mainstream xenomorphs. Firstly, they lack biomechanical features and have longer and thinner limbs, apart from having gaps in the armpit region. While xenomorph teeth are made of metal, the praetomorph teeth were translucent and made out of bone. Although more resilient and stronger than xenomorphs, the praetomorphs were less intelligent and attacked anything that moved. Praeto Facehugger. The Praeto Facehugger was the second stage in the reproductive process of the praetomorph. So, essentially the Praeto Facehugger and a regular xenomorph facehugger are more or less the same, but there exist a few subtle differences, such as flat and smooth skin surface. Its limbs are considerably thinner, yet longer when compared with the usual facehuggers. In fact, the air sacs are noticeably different with a bumpy and solid appearance. The Praeto Facehugger is clearly faster and more agile than xenomorph facehuggers, but can be removed from a host's face with more ease than xenomorph facehuggers. When Lope's facehugger was removed in Planet 4, only superficial damage was witnessed, while the knife used to cut the Praeto facehugger didn't dissolve because of the acidic blood. Since the Praeto facehuggers can't really maintain a strong hold on their host, they've developed the ability to impregnate the host within seconds after first contact. Furthermore, they don't sedate the host chemically because Oram was incapacitated by strangulation. Facehuggers. Facehuggers are the second stage in the reproductive process of xenomorphs. They lie dormant inside xenomorph eggs or ovomorphs until and unless a suitable host comes into the vicinity of the ovomorph. Once the desired stimuli is perceived by the ovomorph, the facehugger breaks its slumber and comes out. As a creature, it's extremely agile and quick, and relies solely on stealth and surprise to attack its victim. Once a facehugger successfully attaches itself to the host's oral cavity, it inserts a proboscis in the throat to begin the impregnation. There have been many theories about the way a facehugger impregnates its victim, but the currently accepted theory is that a facehugger injects a mutagenic substance called Plagiaris prepotens into the victim's esophagus instead of an embryonic xenomorph, which was the previously believed theory. The mutagen restructures the victim's cells on a molecular level, and the host's body uses its own biological material to develop a chest burster. The process may last for several hours, during which the host remains unconscious. Since the facehugger attaches itself to the entire head, the nose also gets blocked. To ensure that the host doesn't die because of the lack of breath, the facehugger provides the host with a mix of gases that the host breathes. It's unknown how exactly such a less intelligent life form carries out such a complex process of deducing the correct atmosphere. Once the process is complete, the facehugger detaches itself and dies. However, if any external force is applied to the facehugger while it's still latched onto the host, its acidic blood burns the host. Even powerful beings like Yautjas and engineers fail to fend off the facehuggers once they've latched on, and almost all attempts at removing them results in the death of the host. Chest burster. In the previous entry, I already mentioned that facehuggers inject the mutagenic chemical called Plagiaris prepotens into a host, so it would be rather inaccurate that chest bursters are implanted into a host. Nevertheless, the mutagen transforms the host's internal physiology on a molecular and cellular level to give rise to a chest burster. Clearly, the process is fairly complex and involves molecular rearrangement to form new organic compounds. So, carbon molecules are disintegrated and recombined to form the hard skeletal structure of a xenomorph. On the other hand, the hydrogen ions are combined with excess sulfate and nitrate ions to form sulfuric and nitric acids that form the blood of the chest burster. Since the chest burster gestates inside and develops from a host, it takes on several traits of the host by copying 10 to 15% of the host's DNA. That's why predaliens have Yautja mandibles and runner xenomorphs are quadrupedal. As far as the gestation period is concerned, it varies from one host to another, but royal chestbursters take the most amount of time to gestate. There have been instances in which chestbursters have emerged from recently deceased hosts, but if the host dies early during the gestation, the chestburster also perishes. Furthermore, chestbursters force the release of endorphins and adrenaline so that the host doesn't feel the need to take any treatment. Once the gestation is complete, the chestburster releases enzymes to make the bones and tissue soft around the chest, which is why the hosts often feel immense pain before the bursting. And when the chestburster finally comes out by ripping apart the chest, the trauma and rapid blood loss instantly kills the host. Once out in the open, a chestburster's immediate need is to find a safe and secure place to hide, where it matures into an adult xenomorph. This growth is extremely rapid, and the resultant beast becomes carnage personified. Runners. As the name suggests, runners are fast and agile, and are often gestated inside a quadrupedal creature like an ox or a dog. Naturally, these xenomorphs have a fairly different physiology than the human-spawned xenomorphs. The adult runner xenomorph takes from its host the physical traits such as digitigrade hind legs and quadruped posture. They have a smooth, domed carapace while being bereft of dorsal tubes that are found in many other xenomorph casts. Even their color is brownish-red, which is in contrast to the mainstream grayish-black xenomorphs. The ability to run on all fours makes them the fastest xenomorphs, and they can even move across walls and ceilings with the same agility. Their only drawback is probably their strength, which seems to be lesser than all other xenomorphs, including drones. Therefore, a runner depends on its speed to outmaneuver and outrun its victim instead of depending on its strength. When their speed is combined with their mass, the resultant momentum is potent enough to crush the victims and shatter the bones. As far as their gestation is concerned, the runners develop completely inside a host before they rip the chest to come out and only need to expand in size, which is unlike the other chestbursters who develop physical features after coming out. In Alien 3, the runner massacres humans on sight and doesn't keep them as hosts for the soon-to-be xenomorph queen. This may hint that runners are not very intelligent and that a xenomorph takes on the psychological traits in addition to the physiological traits. Prowlers. Appearing in the 2021 game Aliens Fireteam Elite, a Prowler looked very similar to a runner xenomorph. First things first, if you haven't played the game, you should do that because it offers plenty of wild shootouts at numerous xenomorph swarms. Moving on, the Prowler in the game seems to have gestated and developed inside an animal host, and that's why its majorly black exoskeleton has tinges of red, which is a characteristic trait of the runner caste. However, the red hue is much more pronounced and richer than runners. Furthermore, the Prowler fashioned a small head crest on its armored body. Since the Prowler's primary objective was looking for victims, it preferred a quadrupedal stance and made good use of its bladed tail. Since the Prowler lacks enough physical strength, it hides in the midst of a swarm full of other xenomorph castes. It emerges from the chaos to leap at prey and savagely maul them with claws and teeth. Once it's holding the prey down, other xenomorphs also join the attack. All in all, the Prowlers are vicious xenomorphs, but they're probably the weakest xenomorph caste. Bursters. Appearing in Fireteam Elite, the Burster Xenomorph came into conflict with the men of the vessel USS Endeavour. The Burster Xenomorph is a fairly rare xenomorph caste that the Colonial Marines encountered on LV-895. As far as the physiology is concerned, the Bursters look like runner xenomorphs, but the former possess a rather pale skeleton and have acidic growths that adorn their skulls and limbs instead of a head crest. The Burster gets its name from these acidic growths, which burst open when the xenomorph dies, and the acid sprays in the vicinity, killing or destroying everything around it. These creatures do resemble resemble another xenomorph caste called the Boilers, but unlike the Boilers, the Bursters can see and take an active part in hunting down their prey, while the Boilers wait to be disturbed. Furthermore, they're fairly agile and active, and are capable of climbing walls, ceilings, etc. The Bursters are probably one of the most dangerous xenomorph castes because they fulfill their life's purpose of killing, even after their death. Predalien. When the Alien and the Predator universes came together, they gave rise to a different kind of monster. This new monster had the cunning of nature's apex killing machine and the sheer brute force of the galaxy's prime hunters. A Predalien is born when a xenomorph gestates inside a Yautja, and the resultant beast takes on Yautja traits such as mandible, dreadlocks, and lighter skin tone. Their strength is far greater than xenomorphs spawned from humans, but are extremely rare because the Yautjas are hard to impregnate. And even so, the other Yautjas kill a Predalien because they're considered the greatest abomination and insult to the Yautja species. The Yautjas use their dreadlock in the same way a cat uses its whiskers, and a Predalien uses the mandibles for the same purpose. These creatures stand tall, and the average height is at least about 10 feet. There are two major kinds of Predalien that have existed throughout time. The first and the most common one is the warrior Predalien. These creatures serve the same purpose as a xenomorph drone, but they are much stronger than regular drones and tend to hunt alone, as opposed to the other xenomorphs. The other kind of Predaliens are the Praetorian Predaliens, and these basically serve as personal bodyguards to the xenomorph queen. Furthermore, they act as leaders of the hive when the queen is absent. A Praetorian Predalien is by default stronger and deadlier than a warrior Predalien, and the former's sole objective is increasing the population of the hive. Drone. The drones are the most commonly found xenomorphs and are often known by names such as warriors, soldiers, workers, etc. These come in different sizes. While some may be as short as 7 feet in length, the others may measure a good 16 feet. From their names, it comes clear that these xenomorphs serve as the principal offensive and defensive units when it comes to combat. However, they also perform several other functions such as construction of the hive, capture of hosts for the facehuggers to impregnate, and the elimination of all kinds of threats. These fierce beasts are tough guns and can prove fairly difficult for humans as well as Yautjas to kill. They're capable of executing premeditated stealth attacks, often taking their victims by surprise. They can also engage in savage close-quarter combat, and even if someone manages to slay the drones, their bodies often burst apart, spilling the acidic blood in the nearby area. Apart from this, the drones are capable of spitting this acidic blood on their sorry victims. As far as their intelligence is concerned, they could be compared to dogs and chimpanzees, and that's why they are patient during their stealth attacks and don't reveal themselves to the victim until the appropriate moment. It's almost always a xenomorph queen that telepathically controls the drones, and they follow her command without hesitation, often laying their lives for the sake of the queen and her hive. Spitters. Appearing in Alien vs. Predator, The Hunt Begins, and Alien's Fireteam Elite, the Spitters are a unique cast of xenomorph that excel in ranged attacks. They have a grey hue with a black-tipped head, as opposed to the more usual cylindrical head. While larger than runners and smaller than drones, their crest resembles the crest of xenomorph queens and Praetorians. The crest comes yellowish-green, pustules or pouches that stores acid, which the creature uses to spit the acid. Furthermore, they possess an extra rib. This isn't seen in any other xenomorph species, or at least not yet. The quickest way to destroy spitters is through rupturing these pouches, but if someone's close enough, the resultant explosion can prove fatal. Probably because they are ranged attackers, they lack canine teeth that other xenomorphs possess. Because they're not very large, they are extremely agile and are adept at leaping from one place to another. Interestingly, they are so accustomed to ranged attacks that they try to flee when someone approaches them. Two other monsters that attack in the same way as the Spitter are the Dilophosaurus from Jurassic Park and the Spitter from Left 4 Dead 2. Crusher. Introduced in the 2013 game Colonial Marines, the Crusher is a specific type of Praetorian that relies heavily on charging on its victim for maximum impact. One could say that the Crusher is a xenomorph equivalent of a battle tank. Crushers are also called Chargers, and this name is attributed to their huge, bulletproof crest that inflicts pure, blunt-force trauma on the sorry victims. The impact is so potent that it can take down an M577 APC, an armored vehicle. The incredibly bulky and durable head crest can sometimes be bigger than the crest of xenomorph queens, and during an attack, the Crusher lowers its head to charge like a raging bull. If the Crusher hits the desired target, the momentum immediately crushes bones, causing an immediate death. Their tank-like physiology helps them to serve the queen as a strong line of defense, but the Crusher's boon is also its bane. Let me explain. When this giant beast gets into attack mode and charges forward, it renders itself blind and fails to see if the target has moved around. It almost reminds me of the cute herbivore dinosaur called Stygimoloch from Jurassic World that loved headbutting the crap out of people. Anyway, the Crusher's immense size and weight restricts it from climbing walls or ceilings, and its only weak point in the body is the back. One can kill a Crusher by emptying one magazine of a P9 Sonic Harpoon artillery remote projectile rifle. Interestingly enough, most Crushers are not born that way but evolve from the Xenomorph caste of Sentries, but they're basically a part of the runner Xenomorph's evolutionary line. Newborn. You are a beautiful, beautiful butterfly. Dr. Gediman, regarding the newborn. Another extremely rare and exotic xenomorph, the newborn made its first and only appearance in the 1997 film Alien Resurrection, which happened to be the first questionable film of the franchise. The xenomorph was born on USM Auriga as a result of hybridization between a xenomorph and a human. Scientists of the United Systems military carried out several experiments to turn the xenomorphs into bioweapons, and one such experiment led to the contamination of a xenomorph queen's DNA with human DNA. The queen eventually developed a secondary reproductive system in the form of a womb and gave birth to the newborn xenomorph. Interestingly enough, the newborn didn't see the xenomorph queen as its mother. Instead, it considered Ripley 8, a clone, as its mother and eventually killed its biological mother, the queen. And although Ripley 8 also developed maternal feelings for the xenomorph, she had to kill the creature to save others. The newborn was the first humanoid xenomorph and possessed features such as human-like eyes, mouth, and nose. The list of differences between the newborn and the usual xenomorphs is quite long. It was larger than regular drones, had pale and fleshy skin instead of dark and metallic exoskeleton, and displayed emotions and curiosity and emotions that a human child would display. When the newborn died, it was still very young and almost 9 feet tall, and therefore its fully evolved form could have outgrown a xenomorph queen. Bloodburster. So, a bloodburster is basically the infant form of a neomorph and represents the third stage in the reproductive cycle of a neomorph. So we know that xenomorphs begin their gestation when a facehugger injects a host with mutagenic enzymes, but that's not what happens with neomorphs. A bloodburster is implanted inside the host from nasal, oral, or other cavities when microscopic spores from an egg sac are dispersed due to an external stimuli. Once the host's orifices are plagued by these spores, their health starts deteriorating and it all ends in a bloodburster savagely ripping out of the host by using its claws. At birth, the bloodburster is completely formed, much like a runner xenomorph or the Deacon from the film Prometheus. Once out in the open, the creature looks for a place to hide and grow, and its quadrupedal stance helps it in running around with great speed. Unlike the chestburster, the bloodburster is fully capable of defending itself and remains aggressive from the moment it's born. However, the most distinguishing trait of a bloodburster is its pale white color, which resembles other unique xenomorph variants, such as the hammerpede. Deacon. Before we go forward, let me just brief you about the black goo and its effects on organisms. The Deacon was a neomorph variant that spawned inside an engineer. While the first stage in a xenomorph's life is an ovomorph, the Deacon had its origin in the extremely volatile mutagen called the black goo. So, the black goo was essentially a bioweapon created by the engineers to unleash genetic chaos. This deadly pathogen rapidly transforms an organism's genetic code and is so potent that it can force a mountain to literally come alive. In the movie Prometheus, David tricks Holloway into consuming a drop of black goo. He then goes on to make love to Elizabeth Shaw, who becomes pregnant despite being barren. It's not before long that an alien creature called a trilobite starts to develop rapidly within her body. And although she managed to surgically remove it before it ripped her body, the trilobite survived the premature birth. The trilobite goes on to impregnate an engineer the same way a facehugger does, and the engineer serves as a host to an infant but fully formed Deacon, which bursts out of the engineer's chest. In one of the comics set 123 years after the events of Prometheus, a mutated construct named Eldon theorizes that something on board the vessel Prometheus had mutated so much that it became an organic and living mountain. Cloned. cloned xenomorph. Like the newborn, the cloned xenomorphs appeared in Alien Resurrection are the result of genetic engineering instead of natural reproduction. Blood samples of the deceased Ellen Ripley were taken by scientists who began the overambitious and godlike project of replicating her as a clone. The plan succeeded, and they created Ripley 8, who had a queen embryo within her. This embryo was successfully harvested on the ship called Auriga by United Systems military. Unbeknownst to the scientists, the queen had a mix of human and xenomorph DNA, and the anomalous abilities and traits were passed on to the xenomorph queen's children. On a macro level, these xenomorphs look just like the usual drones, but a microanalysis tells a different story. The DNA contamination led to several changes, such as a shimmery green hue and a pronounced insectoid appearance. Instead of being entirely biomechanical, the clones were fleshier. They had digitigrade legs and maintained more of a quadrupedal stance. The worst feature that these clones possessed was the ability to reproduce faster than the natural xenomorphs. Interestingly, the clones had access to the memories of Ellen Ripley and considered her as one of their own, and spared Ripley 8 from the carnage. Praetorian. If Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon have taught us one thing, it's the importance of Kingsguard, an elite force of warriors who pledge their lives to the protection of their monarch. And that's who Praetorians are, the Queen's Guard to the Xenomorph Queen. The Praetorians are huge monsters who serve the Queen loyally and remain close to her chamber in the Hive and at other strategic places. They resemble the Queen in appearance and boast a huge head crest. A squad of colonial marines or a group of Yaojas often prove less than a match to these powerful xenomorphs. As far as intelligence goes, they're almost as smart as the Queen, but they don't need to use stealth and surprise to attack because their size and power makes them confident enough to launch a direct attack. The other role that the Praetorians perform, apart from protecting the Queen and her hive, is the protection of the royal jelly that has the power to transform the xenomorphs of one caste into another. When a xenomorph queen dies, one of the Praetorians is chosen to succeed the queen, but to do that, they must use the royal jelly. But how is a Praetorian created in the first place? Well, the use of the royal jelly releases pheromones, which turns the other xenomorph drones against the drone that consumed the jelly. They all attack this drone, and if the drone emerges victorious, it transforms into a hulking 15 feet tall monstrosity. The Abomination. The Abomination was a Predalien that appeared in the video game Aliens vs. Predator in the year 2010. When a few Youngblood predators went MIA, the Predator community sent members of the elite clan to investigate the disappearance. Among these seasoned predators was a predator named Wolf, who engaged with a xenomorph drone named Specimen 6, who proved to be more than a match for Wolf. After neutralizing Wolf, Specimen 6 didn't kill the predator and instead removed Wolf's helmet and allowed a facehugger to inject the mutagen into Wolf. A xenomorph chestburster grew inside of Wolf and later came out of his chest as the Abomination. Much like predators do, the Abomination also started collecting trophies from its victims. The Abomination wreaked havoc on humans and predators alike until another elite predator named Dark learned about the Abomination's existence. The predator leader Spartan ordered Dark to find and destroy the Abomination at all costs. Well, because it was an abomination, and that's exactly what Dark did. Worker. While the drones serve in multiple roles, including that of a worker, there's a specific caste that is solely dedicated toward the welfare of the hive. This Stage 5 xenomorph is created after an adult xenomorph drone molts. Workers are almost always created when the hive needs them. Interestingly, workers are among the very rare xenomorphs that are non-violent. In fact, when a drone transforms into a worker, its size diminishes and the workers stand at about 4 to 6 feet in length. Workers don't engage even when the hive is in threat and escape the scene when attacked. Not only do they maintain the hive, but also build it by releasing the hive resin through their elongated pink proboscis. In fact, it's the worker xenomorphs who lead to the creation of super aliens like the Praetorians. They also feed the royal jelly to the sentries. Alien Queen. I believe the Queen needs no introduction. She is the supreme leader of a hive and rules over all the xenomorphs through a hive mind. Unlike the sapient species like humans and Yaojas who often go against their leaders, the xenomorphs never disobey their monarch and abide by every command, even if it means a certain death. Every hive must have a queen, and in the off chance that the queen dies, Praetorians are fed the royal jelly so that they can molt into a queen. The queen's primary responsibility is laying scores of ovomorphs so that the hive grows larger. Among the xenomorphs, the queen is the most intelligent of them, apart from being the largest and the most powerful. In case her hive and eggs are threatened, she can even make trades for safety. In fact, she can even operate human machines such as a lift. Across comics, we've had several different kinds of queens, including queens that can fly. In one of the comics, a xenomorph queen collaborated with a predator named Big Mama to eliminate the white hybrids, an artificial race created by splicing the DNA of humans, predators, and xenomorphs. But there are several thousand queens, right? So, who controls them all? Well, there is someone called the Queen Mother, who is the leader of all these queens, and the Queen Mother can telepathically communicate with the queens through multiple light years. Necromorph. The Necromorph appeared in the 2019 novel Alien Prototype, in which the rival group of Weyland-Yutani Corporation, called Venture Corporation, finds a leathery and almost decomposing alien egg. They begin their experiments on it, but the initial results don't offer much, and it's already too late by the time they realize the great risk that they've posed for humanity. The Necromorph was a Lone Ranger of sorts and had a mutated form of a xenomorph on V-22, the testing facility of Venture Corporation on Jericho 3, a distant planet controlled by Venture. The facility's chief scientist, Dr. Gagnon, facilitated the breeding of the xenomorph egg, but the resultant creature underwent undesired necrosis. The necromorph was then able to infect human beings with a viral cellular necrosis because the xenomorph's host, Hassan Bagrov, also carried the same disease. Although the necromorph is later killed by Zula Hendricks and a synthetic named Davis, they were too late, and the necromorph had already reproduced. The necromorph's entire body was covered in pustules and lesions that could explode to eject molecular acid. Furthermore, it could spread its disease by creating a black cloud upon its victims, who would end up coughing violently and would develop the similar swollen boils and black lesions as the necromorph itself. Octo Facehugger. The Octo Facehugger was a part of John Spaihts' original script with the working title Alien Engineers. However, the creature failed to make its way into production and was axed. In fact, it was supposed to be an Octo Facehugger to impregnate Holloway and not David. The embryo would later have hatched into another vicious xenomorph called the Beluga Xenomorph, which is another entry on this list. Alas, all of that went for a toss. The Facehugger gets its name from the octopus-like physiology. It latches on to nearby potential hosts with its 8 tentacles until it finishes the embryo transfer, after which it dies a peaceful death. Octo Facehuggers lie dormant inside molluscoid egg-like sacs that hang from ceilings. Royal Facehugger. Also called the Queen Facehugger or Super Facehugger, the Royal Facehugger is a facehugger variant that can give rise to an embryonic xenomorph queen. While the regular xenomorph facehuggers can impregnate only one host, the Royal Facehugger can impregnate at least 2 hosts before dying. The second one is supposed to be a regular xenomorph drone chestburster which serves in the capacity of a guard to the infant queen chestburster. Like all facehuggers, even the Royal Facehuggers come from xenomorph eggs or ovomorphs laid by the queen. But unlike the run-of-the-mill ovomorphs, the royal ovomorphs are larger in size, armored, and come with a bladed tail to protect the royal facehugger inside. The royal facehugger has appeared on screen only once in the special edition of the movie Alien 3, and that too for a blink-and-you-miss-it scene.
Female.
Yeah, she's a lady, look.
Hammerpede. The Hammerpede appeared in the film Prometheus and proved to be the beginning of the end for Charlie Holloway, Elizabeth Shaw, and their crew. The humans wrecked a few ampules that contained the mutagenic black goo. Soon, a few alien worms came in contact with the black goo and mutated into deadly monstrosities, including the Hammerpede. When the crew members Fifield and Milburn got lost and made their way to the room with the black goo urns, they encountered 2 Hammerpedes. Milburn was stupid enough to attempt and make contact with one of the Hammerpedes, which constricted Milburn's arm and broke it. In an attempt to save Milburn, Fifield severed the creature's head, but the acidic blood sprayed on Philfield's helmet, melting it. The decapitated Hammerpede grew itself a new head almost immediately and entered Milburn's body. The Hammerpede had a pale white and grey appearance that resembled the skin of a neomorph. They could grow up to 4 feet in length and had crests which looked much like the crests of a king cobra. Eloise, the half-android, half-xenomorph. Eloise was an android prototype that was experimentally grown through VAT, and she appeared in the comics Aliens Purge and Aliens vs. Predator Pursuit. But what makes her worthy of being on this list is the fact that Eloise was a hybrid xenomorph android. Once, Dr. Fred Leichtner infected an ovomorph with a computer virus. He managed to delete DNA chains and rewrote a few others to grow the egg into an android instead of a xenomorph. Later, Eloise became a valuable asset to Fred in his studies to cure leprosy and a few other diseases. However, the facility was taken over by another firm and started killing xenomorphs and lepers. She could feel their pain, which kicked in her xenomorph queen DNA. She went on to slaughter several personnel and saved the ones she cared for. After this, Eloise and her brood found a new home on the tropical planet of LK-176, but their travel attracted the attention of a Yautja ship, but she fought them with her brood and emerged victorious. After this, she let one Alliance member live, whose sole task was to inform the superiors that she and her brood wanted to live in peace and should be left alone. The Alpha. The Alpha appeared in Alien Bloodlines, the first comic ever in Marvel's Alien Comics line. The comic revolves around defense agent Gabriel Cruz, his son, and the vicious xenomorphs they encounter. The year was 2200 when Gabriel and his men boarded a livestock ship named Hadley to investigate and came across a disfigured and blooded Corcoran Highland goat. It wasn't before long that they were attacked by xenomorphs that had gestated inside the goats. Gabriel was the only survivor and returned to the Epsilon station, where they removed a chestburster from his body just before it was about to rip Gabriel's chest to come out. Henceforth, Epsilon started studying the xenomorphs. However, Gabriel's son Danny and his extremist friends got inside the biolabs and unwittingly unleashed the xenomorphs. The comics revealed quite a few things about the origin and purpose of xenomorphs, but the star of the show was the Alpha, an uber-powerful xenomorph that was kept in stasis. The Alpha was also freed by Danny and his friends, and the xenomorph started growing as soon as it was freed. It looked horribly strong and had a towering structure. We know that all xenomorphs are all things nasty, but the Alpha made his brethren look tame and docile. It fashioned enormous buffalo-like horns in place of a head crest. Furthermore, it had what can only be described as abs and chiseled biceps. It's unknown if the Alpha was a naturally existing xenomorph variant or something created by Weyland Yutani, but I personally think that the Alpha was a Praetorian. White Hybrid Xenomorph. The white hybrids were featured in the comic titled Aliens vs. Predator Deadliest of the Species. In the comics, an AI computer mainframe called Toy was the main antagonist. It was a piece of revolutionary technology that had the capacity to turn dreams into reality. Toy went on to spice the DNAs of xenomorphs, Yautjas, and humans to create an artificial abomination called the White Hybrids. These hybrid xenomorphs possessed the traits of all the three species, such as the ability to communicate and use weapons like humans and Yautjas, the killer instincts of xenomorphs, and the sheer brute force of Yautjas. Apart from having the xenomorph reproductive process, they had acidic blood and lived in a eusocial society. Eventually, we also come across the White Hybrid King, which was nothing short of the abomination of all abominations. The most interesting aspect of this comic was the unholy unity between humans, a Yautja, and a xenomorph queen that came together to fight the White Hybrid King and his brood. When the comics came out, the White Hybrids appeared as terrifying villains that were never seen before in the history of the Alien franchise. Black Goo-infected xenomorph. Not very long ago, Dark Horse Comics tried to bring the Alien, Predator, and Ridley Scott's Prometheus franchises under the same umbrella with their Fire and Stone comics. We know that Ellen Ripley was sent to the exomoon LV-426 by her bosses after contact was lost with the colony there. The comic details the xenomorph attack on the colony and how a group of survivors led by one Derek Russell reaches LV-223. On LV-223, Derek realizes that engineers were trying to use terraforming arrays to transform the moon into a xenomorph gene planet by injecting black goo into the moon's core. In fact, the celestial object had undergone millions of years' worth of evolution within a span of just 90 years. Fire and Stone offered several disgustingly morbid xenomorphs, such as marine xenomorphs, but the most horrid revelation was the effect of black goo on xenomorphs. So, a survivor named Kale took a few men in search of a transmitter which would help them to contact home. However, the men get attacked by a brood of xenomorphs, and a man named Louis, along with a xenomorph, falls into a lake of black goo. The black goo did its job, and the xenomorph and Louis were fused together into one hideous monstrosity. The frontal portion of the xenomorph was where Louis's body was now present. In fact, he had also grown a proboscis. This black goo-infected xenomorph would have caused immense damage had it not been for Kale, who impaled his friend turned xenomorph from behind. In the 4th issue of the comic, even Kale gets exposed to the black goo and follows the same fate as Louis. Beluga Xenomorph. Much like the Octo-Facehugger, the Beluga Xenomorph was a part of John Spate's original script but was later dropped. The Beluga shared a few traits with the Deacon, for instance the spindly limbs and jaws that could come forward out of the mouth. Furthermore, it had an ivory skin tone and an elongated skull, underneath which one could see a humanoid skull. Also, the Beluga didn't have any bones, which made it an amorphous and gelatinous blob that could squeeze through gaps too small for its size. A related but discarded creature was the baby head or the Beluga head, which was supposed to be a smaller creature with more or less the same features as the Beluga Xenomorph. King Alien. The Alien King was also known as Monstrosity and made his first appearance in the comic titled Alien vs. Predator: The Hunt Begins. As a xenomorph caste, the kings are present only in the largest of xenomorph hives and serve as commanders of xenomorph broods instead of undertaking the egg-laying functions of a queen. They are considerably larger than the queens, and hence they serve as a hulking barrier against anyone who threatens a hive. It's unknown if the king takes orders from a queen, but it's possible that kings are formed from queens after molting, and they are essentially hermaphroditic, much like the queens. In fact, there have been many xenomorph kings throughout the franchise's literature, including the Rogue King. But the first idea of a king xenomorph was given by Vincent Ward in the year 1993 in an unproduced script. This king was supposed to have several abilities. He could physically implant chestbursters into potential hosts and camouflage. For perspective, one could compare this king to the Indominus Rex from Jurassic World, but Indominus would be a docile pet compared to King Xenomorph. Neomorph. After the events of Prometheus, David left LV-223 and traveled to another celestial body. This place was altered by the black goo, which terraformed the planet and led to the creation of fungus-like egg sacs that burst into spores when disturbed. These spores then entered a host through their orifices to cause the growth of a bloodburster inside the host's chest cavity, which would later burst the host's body to come out into the open. The bloodburster and its mature form are called neomorphs. In fact, even a hammerpede is a neomorph variant. Although the process of reproduction is similar to that of xenomorphs, the neomorphs have a more organic appearance as opposed to the biomechanical appearance of the xenomorphs. An infant neomorph has a bulbous head and walks on all fours, but as it matures, the head becomes more pointy and assumes a bipedal stance. The spiked tail of a neomorph makes it a force to reckon with because the tail is capable of slashing and even battering down weapons. Much like xenomorphs, a neomorph's physical appearance depends on the host it gestated inside. Neomorphs are far more beastly and animalistic than xenomorphs. While the xenomorphs use stealth and surprise to slay their victims, a neomorph's primary agenda is slaughtering anything that moves, and this makes them less intelligent than xenomorphs. Another major difference is the fact that neomorphs actively consume human flesh for survival, while xenomorphs don't really eat their victims. Queen Mother. This uber-powerful and rarest xenomorph variant is quite literally the queen of all queens. When compared with other xenomorph castes, such as the usual queens or empresses, the Queen Mother makes them look like babies. The beast can measure up to 100 feet, but different sources in literature have depicted her as even bigger. The difference in the size may be because of the age of the Queen Mother and the size of the hive she rules, because a xenomorph queen grows in direct proportion to the size of her hive. She has 4 arms, dorsal spines, and metallic teeth, along with an inner jaw. Despite their enormous size, Queen Mothers are capable of running, jumping, and pouncing. But what makes her even deadlier is her telepathic abilities, which can penetrate the minds of even humans. She uses the human being's emotional attachments to lure them into the hive and to their ultimate doom. Furthermore, the Queen Mother can enter a human's dreams to exploit their fears and desires. Interestingly, Queen Mothers are created either by molting or by special ovomorphs that lead to the birth of a Queen Mother chestburster instead of a facehugger. The Matriarch, aka Hag Queen. The Matriarch appeared in the Alien vs. Predator video game, in which she had been captured and kept prisoner on BG-386 by Yautjas for thousands of years. Eventually, Weyland-Yutani personnel arrived and the ensuing struggle led to the Hag Queen's freedom. The Yautjas had been using her eggs to breed xenomorphs for their coming-of-age rituals or the hunt. At some point of time, the Yautja city was abandoned, but the Matriarch was still in captivity until Weyland-Yutani found her and moved her to one of their research facilities so that she could be studied. What a dumb move. The humans had also captured several xenomorph drones, and it wasn't before long that one of the drones, named Specimen 6, broke its captivity and freed the Queen. They set up a hive in a nearby refinery and used the Weyland-Yutani men as hosts. Eventually, she's killed by Rookie and Corporal Tequila, who incinerates the refinery. The Queen's death sent neural shockwaves to the xenomorphs, most of whom collapsed immediately. Empress. The Empress serves in the same capacity as a xenomorph queen. The only difference is that she rules over several queens and bows down only to the Queen Mother, the ultimate monarch of xenomorphs. It turns out that a xenomorph queen evolves into an empress when her hive grows extremely large. As long as an empress is present in a hive, the queens don't struggle for her position, but in the absence of the empress, the queens fight each other for the position of an empress, and the one that's victorious becomes the empress. It's the empress who could later transform into a Queen Mother, but that takes hundreds of years to happen. weapon. A special kind of Empress was the War Empress, which was altogether a different xenomorph caste. As the name suggests, she's responsible for a hive's safety in the event of a war, and looks quite similar to a xenomorph queen, but her mesoskeleton is almost 2 times as hard as that of a typical xenomorph queen. She can mind control other xenomorph castes into a battle frenzy, and they would charge into battle, all guns blazing. Red Xenomorph. The red xenomorphs appeared in the comic Alien Genocide, which revolves around a xenomorph civil war on their home planet, Xenomorph Prime. In the comic, humans kidnap a queen mother from Xenomorph Prime, and the lack of a monarch plunges the xenomorphs into chaos and anarchy. With no one left to maintain and monitor the genetics, a few xenomorphs began deviate genetically from the rest of the hive. A new queen mother from the typical strain was soon brought to life, but it took long enough, and a queen mother from the new strain or the red strain also revealed her presence. Thus began the struggle between the red xenomorphs and the black xenomorphs. Although both sides coexisted peacefully for a few years, a civil war broke out between the reds and the blacks. Eventually, the reds were killed when the red queen mother was obliterated by humans using nukes. An important thing to note here is that the red and the black factions of the xenomorphs were simply 2 different strains. They were given the color codes for the ease of the readers because humans couldn't really distinguish the difference between these 2 strains. Xenoborg. As the name suggests, the Xenoborg was a cybernetically enhanced xenomorph and appeared in 3 different Aliens vs. Predator video games. A madman named Livermore Evanston started dreaming about controlling the entire galaxy, and in his quest to do so, he created the Xenoborgs by blending genetic modifications and cybernetic upgrades. But before he could successfully execute his plans of creating a Xenoborg army, Livermore's secret was revealed, and both Yautjas and humans came to stop him. It turns out that as long as Livermore was controlling the Xenoborgs against the combined Yautja human threat, the Xenoborgs were uncoordinated and chaotic. However, once he lost control, their xenomorph instincts came to the fore, and they started slaughtering anything that offered resistance. The primary change that Livermore brought on his xenomorphs was the ability to be radio-controlled, in addition to using weapons. Furthermore, he gave them strong armors. Grid. Grid was an extremely vicious xenomorph that appeared in the Alien vs. Predator film, novel, and video game. The xenomorph drone was born from one of the members of the expedition that got trapped inside the sacrificial chamber. It matured rapidly into an adult xenomorph before encountering the young blood predator named Chopper. Grid impaled Chopper even before the predator could learn about Grid's presence and killed the young predator. Grid's next victim was Celtic, who suffered a similar fate as Chopper. With 2 predators down, Grid went after Scar, the last and bravest of all the predators present there. To take on Scar, Grid unleashed other xenomorph drones. Although Scar managed to knock several xenomorphs out, Grid was out of the young predator's reach. Grid was soon called back by the xenomorph queen so that she could be freed. In the end, Grid's short life ended when Scar's self-destruct device went off, destroying the structure and the xenomorphs trapped inside. Carrier. The Carrier xenomorph caste is one of the evolutionary finalities of a Praetorian. Its primary function is to transport facehuggers to places far and away. This helps the facehuggers to save their limited supply of energy because they are not capable of consuming food. Additionally, the Carrier caste is a force to reckon with because the facehuggers that it carries don't hesitate on the beings that pose threats. Furthermore, the Carrier comes with hook-like size that are potent enough to slash victims. As far as its appearance is concerned, it looks like an overgrown drone but is essentially a Praetorian variant. But then again, it doesn't share the same strength as its sibling caste of Praetorians and is just strong enough to defend itself while transporting the facehuggers. To ensure that the facehuggers sustain the travel, a carrier's physiology enables it to provide nutrients to the facehuggers. While most carriers can carry up to 6 facehuggers, a supercarrier can hold up to 12 of the little monsters. Rogue Xenomorph. The Rogue, or the King Alien, appeared in the comic titled Aliens Rogue and was the result of gene splicing by a scientist named Kleist. Professor Kleist had previously created several hybrid xenomorphs but was struggling with a hybrid xenomorph queen. Most of his test results were deformed monstrosities that perished too soon. However, he resorted to splicing the xenomorph DNA with the DNA of a man named John Cray, and the result was a gigantic male counterpart of a xenomorph queen, which Kleist preferred to call the King Alien. Kleist had hoped that this guy would be a tamer version of the Queen, but boy, he was in for a surprise. Kleist learned that the King was far from tame and was extremely aggressive to anything he considered a threat, including naturally occurring xenomorphs. The King sensed a xenomorph queen in a nearby base and broke captivity to duel the queen for supremacy, and the ensuing chaos turned out to be a disaster at the 2 bases because several xenomorph drones were unwittingly unleashed. Although the queen was smaller and weaker than the Rogue King, she had more combat experience and eventually defeated the King, who didn't fully understand how to put his strengths to good use. Aquatic Xenomorph. While all xenomorphs can swim to an extent, the aquatic xenomorphs from the comic Aliens Colonial Marines were better swimmers because of 3 pairs of pleopods instead of legs and a lobster-like tail. The swimming was further enhanced because of the webbed hands. I'm not entirely sure if these creatures were good at terrestrial locomotion, but I believe they could move around on land as well, albeit with a bit of difficulty. They possessed thin and short tendrils and a shorter dorsal tube than most xenomorphs. Having said that, aquatic xenomorphs are much larger than drones and could be cousins to the Praetorians. And yet, there are not many transbreed Praetorians, so the aquatic xenomorphs could be the result of some kind of experiment gone wrong. Irradiated xenomorph. The irradiated xenomorph was a novelty introduced by Marvel Comics in their one-shot comic called Aliens Aftermath. The xenomorph drone was the last surviving member of its species on Hadley's Hope after the place went into a nuclear winter because of the destruction of the atmosphere processing unit. The irradiated xenomorph had mutated into a unique glowing monster, something that's never been seen earlier. In the year 2214, an extremist journalistic group called the Renegade arrived on LV-426, home to the irradiated xenomorph. Renegade members had previously bombed a fueling station and wished to lay low on LV-426, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. The xenomorph's first victim was Renegade's pilot, Drake, whom it impaled with its tail. The irradiated xenomorph then went after other crew members, and presumably died after a skirmish with Cata Vasquez, but its final fate is largely unknown. The glowing xenomorph emitted a bioluminescent blue color because of a prolonged exposure to the radiations during the nuclear winter. The mutation was so potent that even the xenomorph's acidic blood had mutated into a substance similar to liquid nitrogen, which was so cold that it could lead to cryogenic burns. Belly bursters. The belly bursters were a unique variant of the chest bursters, who broke out of the abdomen instead of the chest cavity. The belly bursters were implanted into pregnant women by the pre-alien that emerged from the Scar Predator at the end of the first Alien vs. Predator movie. There are 2 possible reasons why the Predalien chose only pregnant victims. The first could be that the belly burster embryo would be able to feast on the fetus, and the second could be that a pregnant woman's womb offered a better environment for the embryo to grow. Once ready to come out, a belly burster would come out of the victim by savagely puncturing the abdomen. These creatures appeared in 2 comics as well, namely Aliens Labyrinth and Aliens Resistance. Flying Queen. The Flying Queen is an extremely rare kind of a queen that possesses bat-like membraned wings, which help her to achieve a powered flight. In the comics, we've had the opportunity to witness several different variants of this flying monstrosity. In the Alien Space Marines comic line, the Flying Queen was a humongous blue-colored xenomorph with mainstream xenomorph arms, large talons, an axe-like tail, and wings that were riddled with holes. The explanation for these holes could be that this Flying Queen was a pretty old creature. If we compare the dragons Vhagar and Drogon from the Game of Thrones universe, we can see that Vhagar, being the oldest dragon alive, had several holes on its wings, while Drogon's wings were intact because of its youth. In Operation Aliens, the Flying Queen appeared black in color and had vestigial arms in addition to a bat-like tail, while her crest had a series of blunted spikes. In Aliens Armageddon, the flying xenomorph queen retained most of the features from the one in Operations Aliens, but lacked arms and had a smoother mesoskeleton. But this one was more aggressive in nature and even killed her own kind, which could be a hint toward the fact that she was not a natural or pure xenomorph. Anchor Point Hybrid. The Anchor Point Hybrid xenomorph appeared in the unproduced screenplay of Alien 3, and was quite different from the typical xenomorphs in terms of appearance and birth. Wells was the sorry victim inside whom the gestation completed in a few hours, before the Anchor Point hybrid ruptured her body to come out. However, the process of the hybrid's birth later inspired the birth of neomorphs in Ridley Scott's Prometheus. The Anchor Point hybrid's embryo or biochemical enzyme was not implanted through a facehugger, but by the splicing of the DNAs of a human and a xenomorph. This creates a special ovomorph that then reforms itself in the presence of a host to shoot spores that later infect the host. Because of the presence of human DNA, the Anchor Point hybrid's appearance was more humanoid than the typical xenomorphs. It had 2 beady red eyes, a flexible inner jaw, and a human-like nose. Furthermore, its vocalization was also different. However, since the Anchor Point hybrid was not a natural xenomorph, it was killed by a xenomorph drone. Ovomorph. Ovomorphs are the first stage in the reproductive process of a xenomorph. A xenomorph queen lays these eggs that have a facehugger inside, and the ovomorph remains dormant until the time a suitable host presents itself in the vicinity. A queen produces these eggs in her ovipositor before laying them. Each of these eggs is at least 2 feet tall and has a leathery dark brown color. But if an ovomorph lies dormant for quite too long, the color changes to grayish white. By long, I mean hundreds and even thousands of years. Contrary to what may seem, an ovomorph is not just a casing for the facehugger, but is an entirely different organism on its own. As for durability, the ovomorphs can drop from a tall building and not break or bring any harm to the facehugger inside. The egg maintains its integrity and only bounces off the ground. Once the egg detects a potential host, it releases free acids into the dormant facehugger, which then become active and alive. Although most ovomorphs contain only one facehugger, some may contain up to 4. And of course, there are other variants like royal ovomorphs and praetorian ovomorphs. Berserker alien. As the name suggests, the Berserker alien was the result of a chestburster that erupted from the Berserker super predator, who himself was the leader of the super predator clan. The super predators were a group of strong and overgrown Yaojas, and not because hunting was honorable and a Yaoja's way of life. The Berserker alien was essentially a predalien and turned out to be one of the most dangerous xenomorphs ever because of its host. Unlike most predaliens, the Berserker possessed an inner jaw and pseudo-mandibles. It had red pigmentation on its largely black body, which was more heavily armored than a drone's body. In fact, the Berserker alien's mesoskeleton is comparable to that of a Praetorian. Much like Praetorians, the Berserker alien had a crest, albeit a smaller one. Another feature that made it a force to reckon with is its speed, which is comparable to an adult runner. Red Queen Mother. The Red Queen Mother came into existence after the incumbent Queen Mother was abducted from Xenomorph Prime. Appearing in the comic Aliens Genocide, the Red Queen Mother died when Daniel Grant, a member of the Colonial Marines, destroyed her along with her hive with nukes. He did so to aid the Black Xenomorphs and weaken the Red Xenomorphs. K-Series. The K-Series Xenomorphs appeared in the real-time strategy video game Aliens vs. Predators Extinction. It's largely unknown exactly how the K-Series Xenomorphs were created, but their known purpose was to serve as a bioweapon to Weyland-Yutani Corporation. It was one Dr. Kadinsky who led a covert research, who probably used xenomorph eggs left by the Predator Council of Ancients thousands of years prior. Apart from the gold and silver-colored exterior, the K-Series Xenomorph behaved and looked exactly like the naturally born Xenomorphs. However, each of the K-Series Xenomorph casts had a different coloration, which was probably to help humans differentiate between the K-Series Xenos and the regular Xenos. But nature always has a way of winning. We've seen that in various movies. Do you remember the Jurassic World ending? Anyway, something about the K-Series Xenomorphs prevented them from winning any battle with their natural brethren. When the K-Series Xenomorphs encountered a hive belonging to the natural strain, their instinct would be to kill the opponent queen, the Praetorians, and destroy the Ovomorphs, but they'd adopt the drones. However, the natural Xenomorphs wished complete annihilation of all the K-Series Xenomorphs. Their first skirmish happened in a Weyland-Yutani laboratory, which was a doing of Dr. Kladinsky, who pitted the two strains against each other to prove the viability of his work. In the end, the original strain manages to annihilate all the K-Series Xenomorphs, despite the latter being larger and more destructive. Biodrone. The third adventure module of Alien, the role-playing game, introduced the Biodrone, an artificial variant of a typical xenomorph drone. When a socio-economic conglomerate of North, South, and Central America called the United Americas procured xenomorph specimen, they started a covert bioweapons program called Project Lifeforce to convert xenomorphs into an obedient race. However, they soon realized that controlling the xenomorph population was a challenge to the feasibility of the project. To counter this problem, Dr. N.L. Babak rearranged the xenomorph genetic code to ensure that the drones died after living for 6 days. It seemed like a workable plan because this way the biodrones would be able to destroy the enemy target and die before they could infestate a region and risk the civilian population. Additionally, the biodrones would fail to evolve into a xenomorph queen within a span of 6 days. However, Dr. Babak unintentionally overlooked the overmorphing abilities of the xenomorphs, by virtue of which they could implant chestbursters without the need of overmorphs. So, the project was basically a failure. Bodyburster. The Bodyburster was a xenomorph variant that came into existence because of contact with 26 Draconis, a variant of the black goo. The 26 Draconis was supposed to be a cure for neomorph spore infection, and while it didn't stop the bellyburster from developing inside a host's body, the 26 Draconis had several side effects, including DNA splicing. It was first given to a sorry host who had already been implanted with a chestburster. The black goo variant went on to serve as a bridge between the xenomorph DNA and human DNA, which led to a resequenced DNA and created a terrifying organism called the Bodyburster. As the name suggests, the Bodyburster comes out of a host by ripping their entire body, before which this host undergoes skeletal, muscular, and tissue transformation to create the Bodyburster. However, the chest burster present in the host did stop growing, as was primarily the intention of 26 Draconis. A matured body burster looks much like a xenomorph drone with a few humanoid traits. The most gruesome thing about the body burster were its fangs, which could inject enzymes into a victim that turned the victim into another body burster. That almost sounds like xenomorphs with vampiric tendencies. Nevertheless, the facility where the first body burster came to life was destroyed, and all information and data about it was lost. Animen Xenomorphs. The comic titled Predator vs. Judge Dredd vs. Aliens Splice and Dice introduced a monstrous madman named Dr. Niels Reinster, who was a genetic expert and a crazy scientist from Mega City 1. He often experimented with animal and human DNAs and managed to create several humanoid beasts. These guys served him as his sapient henchmen and retained all the traits of their animal counterpart. When Reinstadt came in contact with aliens and predators, he unleashed facehuggers on his Animen, and the resultant chest bursters matured into Animen Xenomorphs. He created 4 of these beasts, namely the Urso-humanoid hybrid xenomorph that spawned from a bear-human hybrid, the Servo-humanoid hybrid xenomorph that spawned from a deer-human hybrid, the Rhinocerato-humanoid hybrid xenomorph that spawned from a rhinoceros-human hybrid, and the Elephanto-humanoid hybrid xenomorph that spawned from an elephant-human hybrid. Black Queen Mother. The humans sided with the Black Queen Mother and her brood in the Xenomorph Civil War to get hold of the royal jelly. Much like the Red Queen Mother, the Black Queen Mother was also molted from an Empress or a Praetorian after the incumbent Queen Mother from Xenomorph Prime was abducted. Apart from this, there's precious little that I can mention here. 7. The 2021 comic Alien Infiltrator introduced a new kind of a xenomorph drone, which was basically an albino super drone. The xenomorph's body was entirely white and translucent as opposed to the typical black metallic bodies of regular drones. This rare appearance also earned the title of albino drone. However, there was much more to Seven apart from its color. During the course of the comic, Seven managed to command other xenomorphs kept in captivity to spit acid on their cages to dissolve the cages. However, Seven was doused with fire by one of the characters named Dr. Erin Cash, and the attack stopped. Cash concluded that in the absence of a xenomorph queen, Seven was able to command its drone brethren, which made Seven a super drone, capable of molting into a xenomorph queen. Furthermore, Seven could also influence creatures that resulted from exposure to the black goo. Queen LV-223. Appearing in the comics Prometheus, Life and Death, and Aliens, Life and Death, the Queen from LV-223 was a mutated xenomorph queen. However, it's uncertain if the Queen spawned on a mutated creature from LV-223, or she spawned from a human being and later came in contact with black goo. Nevertheless, the Queen was encountered by a few humans stuck on the exomoon. Her brood took at least 2 men to the hive and had them face-hugged. Much like the Queen from James Cameron's Aliens, the Queen from LV-223 also gave in and ordered her horde to retreat when the safety of her hive was put at risk. The later issues of the comics featured an engineer who had woken up from his stasis with the intention of ending all life on LV-223. The humans convinced to see the threat that the engineer was. She did so and fought the engineer, but the last of the comic implied that the Queen was killed by the engineer while the brood was looking for the new Queen who was spawning inside a man named Chris. Queen Facehugger. The Queen Facehugger was a special variant of Facehugger brought out by Kenner. This Facehugger was fairly larger than normal Facehuggers, but could not really impregnate victims. In fact, its main purpose was to safeguard the Overmorphs and other Facehuggers inside a hive. It could even pin down potential victims to allow the regular Facehuggers to implant the victims. One could say it was the Queen of Facehuggers instead of a Queen Facehugger, which gives the impression that it's a royal Facehugger. Gorilla Alien. The Gorilla Alien was an action figure produced by Kenner Products and went on to appear in both video games and comics. Quite true to its name, the Gorilla Xenomorph came into existence when a Facehugger impregnated a tetrabranchiate animal, native to planet Zeven, with a chestburster embryo. The resultant chestburster and its subsequent matured form possessed a physiology similar to primates, which were the results of traits borrowed from the host species. However, there exist a number of xenomorphs that have spawned out of earthly gorillas. In fact, in one of the stories, colonial marines encountered a Praetorian that had spawned from a gorilla. I wonder what had happened if a Facehugger impregnated the King Kong, or worse, Godzilla. That's gonna be some nasty monster. Gore Buster. Following the loss of all data pertaining to the body burster, Project Lifeforce tried to recreate the beast by employing genetic manipulation techniques. However, that dream went for a toss when the final result turned out to be a sickly and horrid abomination called the Gore Buster. The Body Buster's initial 2 stages of development are the same as typical xenomorphs. A host is impregnated by a facehugger, and a chest burster develops inside the host. However, while a typical facehugger host feels perfectly fine due to the release of adrenaline, the Gore Burster host develops flu-like symptoms and puts on an enormous amount of water weight. The chest burster that finally comes out after ripping the host apart is a dark-skinned and gruesome creature. It leaves behind a slimy and toxic pink residue. Touching this residue with naked skin leads to bloating and explosion of the subject. The Body Burster was then considered the near-perfect assassination weapon because it had a short lifespan and didn't develop any further. Trophy's hatchling. The trophy wife, Karen Delacroix, was impregnated by a chest burster, and the creature that finally came out was called Trophy's hatchling. It turned out to be the archenemy of the White Hybrid King, who threatened Karen and others. In fact, the hatchling saw Karen as its mother. It was white in color and had a humanoid face, but the rest of its features resembled a typical xenomorph. However, it was far more intelligent than other xenomorphs because it had the ability to talk, use weapons, and think, instead of just reacting to situations. The hatchling helped Karen, Big Mama, and the Xenomorph Queen to defeat the White Hybrid, and because of that, even Yautjas accepted its presence and existence. Unlike most hybrid xenomorphs, the hatchling didn't die in the comics and continues to accompany Karen in her adventures. Spliced xenomorphs. Although these are not a naturally occurring strain of xenomorphs, I wouldn't mind calling them an entirely different xenomorph caste. The spliced xenomorphs are basically xenomorphs with altered DNA that have highly advanced predatory standards and are oftentimes more aggressive than natural xenomorphs. The pronounced predatory nature comes from the fact that these beasts retain the animalistic traits of the organism whose DNA was used for the gene splicing. Therefore, scientists often use DNA from rather docile and calm creatures like sheep, llamas, and cattle to make the resultant xenomorph less aggressive. For instance, a few xenomorphs created by Ernst Kleist curled their tails around him, much like cats do. And yet, there are other scientists who don't really care about the aftermath or are too ignorant. These men and women use predatory creatures with the intent of creating a monster that can be weaponized. The spliced xenomorphs look similar to regular xenomorphs in terms of the basic physiology, but they do bear certain specific differences caused due to the genetic rearrangement. But then there was Dr. Niels Reinstor, whose xenomorphs were highly aggressive and violent. Defender. The Defenders appeared in the 1994 arcade game Aliens vs. Predators. These are extremely strong xenomorph variants that can deflect the most powerful of incoming assaults, using nothing but their carapace, wrists, or legs, because these body parts of the Defender consist of super strong armor. The Defenders have a humanoid bipedal movement and make no use of their forearms in movement. Although named Defender, it doesn't defend the hive as much as a sentry. However, it does perform the same tasks as a drone and helps to find new hosts. It seems that a Defender was created to secure hosts from scenes where their xenomorphs would face heavy enemy attack. Mantis alien. As the name suggests, the Mantis alien was the result of a xenomorph spawning inside a mantis. But logically speaking, a facehugger would dwarf the largest praying mantis, which is about 6 to 8 inches in length. More importantly, the head of a mantis this big would be quite small, let alone the space required for a chest burster to grow. So, it's safe to assume that the Mantis xenomorph actually spawned inside an extraterrestrial mantis that was large enough for the facehugger to impregnate. Otherwise, it could be an artificial creation. Whatever be the case, the Mantis alien had insectoid characteristics like a greenish hue, longer arms with spiked undersides, and pincer-like tips. Furthermore, it could jump over 90 feet without any trouble. Smasher. Also appearing in the 1994 arcade game Aliens vs. Predators, the Smasher was a xenomorph drone variant with brownish-green color. As the name suggests, they love smashing the crap out of their enemies, much like the Crusher Praetorian. However, a Smasher doesn't even come close to a Crusher as far as strength is concerned. Dark Alien. The Dark Alien appeared in the crossover comic Witchblade Aliens Darkness Predator Mindhunter. Jackie Estosado, or the Darkness, had several powers including the ability to summon several small demons called Darklings. The Dark Alien was born from one of these Darklings and had the abilities possessed by Darkness himself. This made the demonic xenomorph quite impossible to kill till the time it was within the shadows. In the end, a predator named Sister Midnight kills Dark Alien by causing an explosion on the ship in which the Dark Alien was present. Sister Midnight manages to kill the Dark Alien with the help of the Witchblade, sustaining several injuries in the process and having done the best she could. However, Sister Midnight herself gets mortally wounded. To learn more about female predators, you should check out our other videos on the subject. Tusked Xenomorph. The tusked xenomorphs were basically used as attack dogs by a bad blood clan called the Killers. The chestburster of these xenomorphs were also tusked, which has not been seen in any other chestburster. One could argue that the tusks could be a trait acquired from the host, but the tusked xenomorphs spawn within humans, so these tusks aren't a variation that depends on the host. The tusked xenomorphs fashioned a more crustacean physiology, and their heads were plated as opposed to the domed or ridged heads of typical xenomorphs. Despite being largely black, they did have red hues on their dorsal spines, tails, limbs, and heads. And of course, their tusks are probably the most prominent point of difference between them and the typical xenomorphs. Once upon a time, the killer Yautja clan decided to come to the hostile planet of Ryushi so that the humans could be killed as prey. However, the Machiko Noguchi, the female predator, and the Ryushi hunters had taken captive the xenomorph queen. When the killer Yautja clan arrived on Ryushi, the tusked xenomorph switched sides, the tusked xenomorph switched sides and turned on the killer clan. Specimen 6. Appearing in the 2010 video game Alien vs. Predator, Specimen 6 became an absolute favorite amongst a long list of xenomorphs that previously appeared in games. Bred in captivity and controlled by one Dr. Groves, Specimen 6 was a smartass, even as a juvenile. When it came out as a chestburster, it noticed a containment tube. It immediately retreated back inside the host and came out of the mouth. Groves understood that the creature was too intelligent and could pose a threat, but Carl Bishop Weyland barred Groves from killing Specimen 6 so that it could be studied. To differentiate it from the others, the number 6 was branded on the xenomorph's head, and it wasn't before long that Specimen 6 once again tried to break captivity after hearing the cries of a xenomorph queen in the same facility. However, Groves managed to stop it once again. When Weyland-Yutani personnel opened a Yautja pyramid, the shockwave caused by it was potent enough to disable the facility's security system, which freed Specimen 6. The drone immediately freed its brethren before freeing the queen herself. Eventually, Specimen 6 transformed into a xenomorph queen herself when Weyland's combat droids tried to capture her. By far, one of the most intelligent drones that I've come across. Specimen 6 is a mini-legend as far as non-cinematic xenomorphs are concerned. Boiler. The Boiler xenomorph made its first appearance in the game Aliens Colonial Marines and was among the many xenomorph casts explicitly created for the game. The Boiler gets its name from its body that's filled with boil-like pustules and lesions. These rather decrepit xenomorphs have a fragile armor, which leaves them vulnerable to most forms of attack, and the numerous deformities don't help them either. In fact, they have a restricted movement, and to make things worse, they don't even have a sense of sight. Mostly, the Boilers spend their time crouching and hiding, but becoming more active when approached by a threat. The Boilers don't have a very long lifespan and often die of natural causes, and at other times they turn themselves into the xenomorph version of a kamikaze. These ugly xenomorphs launch themselves on their victims and self-destruct on impact, which causes an explosion of the Boiler's body and the acidic blood gets showered in the vicinity. Because of their many limitations and constant pain, the Boilers have a brief attention span and can't be considered intelligent. Killer Croc Alien. The Killer Croc Alien appeared in the Batman and Alien crossover comic in which a crocodile was impregnated by a facehugger. The crocodile alien was exceptionally large for a xenomorph that's not a queen. With a size comparable to a xenomorph queen, this reptilian xenomorph was way more muscular and bulkier than typical xenomorph drones. Furthermore, it had 6 dorsal spines instead of the typical 4. The crocodile alien also had a bulbous dome on its drone-like head. For durability, it possesses an armored mesoskeleton and manages to shrug off almost all forms of incoming attacks, including impalement. For offense, the xenomorph possesses several spikes in various body parts and an exceptionally long tail with a considerably long and razor-sharp spiked blade. In the comic, Batman manages to destroy the crocodile alien after having it fall into a pool of lava.
What's going on?
Tarkatan Xenomorph. Mortal Kombat has a rather rich lore, and it would have been surprising if there wasn't an Alien and Mortal Kombat crossover when the Xenomorphs were running amok from Gotham to Mega City 1. So, many centuries ago, a brood of Xenomorphs invaded the realm called Outworld, home to the Tarkatan race. They established a temporary colony and planned to take over the realm, but the denizens of Outworld managed to exterminate the alien invaders. However, a small clutch of Overmorphs was left untouched. because they had been hidden deep underground. Soon, the clutch was found by a group of Tarkatans. Unfortunately, before the clutch could be destroyed, a xenomorph leapt onto the face of the leader, Baraka, and impregnated him. It wasn't before long that a chestburster erupted from Baraka's chest after violently rupturing it. The chestburster took no time to mature and killed the rest of the scout party. The Tarkatan xenomorph became a killing machine and built a hive where it brought natives for impregnation, and anyone who resisted was slaughtered immediately. The Tarkatan xenomorphs retain the basic xenomorph physiology, but of course, they take on several traits from their Tarkatan hosts. Of course, they're bulkier and stronger than the xenomorphs that spawn from human beings, but instead of an elongated and cylindrical head, the Tarkatan xenomorphs fashioned a more spherical head. Much like the Tarkatans, the xenomorphs also had more vicious teeth inside their lipless mouth. But the most prominent Tarkatan trait that the xenomorphs possessed were the sheath-like appendages, which are similar to the sword-like arms of the Tarkatans. In Mortal Kombat X, we get to see several variations of the Tarkatan xenomorph. Chrysalis. Appearing in the 1994 arcade game Alien vs. Predator, the Chrysalis seemed to be an enormous xenomorph, whose size could be compared to a Praetorian. Unlike the typical xenomorphs, the Chrysalis was a greyish-green beast with a tough mesoskeleton. It gets its name from the chrysalis that one can see gestating when one encounters it for the first time. Interestingly, this chrysalis is also capable of attack and movement. The Chrysalis xenomorph's deadly head somewhat extends over its head from within the carapace when it delivers a head bite, and a similar extension of the inner jaw also comes into picture. Although the Chrysalis xenomorphs don't have any specific or designated role within the hive, they're often seen protecting the xenomorph queen, and can lay their lives for her. Ryushi Queen. Michiko Noguchi was asked to lead a ranching colony named Prosperity Wells on planet Ryushi. But soon after she took charge, Prosperity Wells was attacked by a Yautja hunting party, who unleashed xenomorphs for unblooded Yautjas to hunt and get blooded. In a later story of the comics, we see the Ryushi Queen joining hands with a clan of bad blood predators called Killer Predators. This queen was more or less similar to the other regular queens except for her crest, which was in a three-pronged shape, while other queens have their crests in the form of a T. Also, she's known to survive the events of Prosperity Wells. But the most fascinating fact about this beast is that she formed an alliance with not just one Yautja, but with an entire clan. Raven. The Raven looks like an overgrown bipedal xenomorph and is entirely covered in a chitinous, bulletproof carapace. Much like a xenomorph queen, it walks on its long hind legs. A raven's tail has what it looks like a ridge of spines, and it ends on a blade in the shape of a harpoon. Interestingly, its face has somewhat humanoid features including eye sockets, nasal cavities, and human-like teeth and jaws. Furthermore, the teeth are not metallic like most other xenomorphs. In fact, they're blunt instead of sharp. With a height similar to that of a xenomorph queen or a Praetorian, the Raven is clearly a force to reckon with. Razor Claws. The Razor Claw xenomorph appeared in the 1994 arcade game Alien vs. Predator, and it represented a breed of xenomorphs that were essentially much larger than the regular xenomorphs. Furthermore, it differed from the typical xenomorphs due to its purple color, as opposed to the regular black one. It had long and razor-sharp claws on each finger, and that's how this monstrosity gets its name. The Razor Claw uses its speed to charge at the victim and uses its namesake claws to often cut them in two halves. During the xenomorph infestation that took place in San Drad, a horde of xenomorphs was led by the Razor Claw xenomorph. They slaughtered several colonial marines and even injured a friend of Dutch Schaefer, the character Arnold played in the first Predator movie. However, the onslaught was put to an end by Dutch, a cyborg, and two Yautjas. Walled Alien. The Walled Alien or Walled Xenomorph was an obnoxious xenomorph that appeared in the 1990 video game Aliens. To be very honest, the Walled Alien was a weird character. Its mesoskeleton wasn't complete and had a couple of holes where it was supposed to have its arms. Additionally, it's perpetually suspended because it's stuck to a wall. While its initial color is blue, it turns pink after taking enough damage. Because it can't move, it uses its large tentacles to attack enemies. Oh yeah, it can also launch cocoon xenomorph drones. Starry-faced Alien. Another strange xenomorph that appeared in the same game was the starry-faced xenomorph, or the star-faced xenomorph. Unlike the walled alien, this one was a minor enemy. The star-faced alien appears only once along with several other xenomorphs. It has a body that's similar to a drone's. However, it's brown in color and doesn't possess a tail. The xenomorph gets its name from its head, which has several protrusions that give its head the shape of a star. However, it's comparable to the height of a power loader and hence it's a large xenomorph. Its movement is also peculiar because it performs locomotion in a vertical manner and launches acid rounds on its victims. Wraith Xenomorph. This hermaphrodite xenomorph was introduced in a one-shot comic by Dark Horse Comics published in 1998. Aliens Wraith was written by Jay Stevens and art was provided by Eduardo Risso. It centers around an alien that lives like a lone wolf in the planet called Turgo Myers and has an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Locals said it claimed the lives of 12 young boys before it was finally put down by the colonial marines. The comic describes Wraith as a strange xenomorph with white skin, a skinny and fragile body and unusually long arms. Wraith was slow but strong. It couldn't even walk in an upright stance and looked like a hunchback. We believe this was Wraith's last days as a living xenomorph, and he was close to his natural death due to old age but was killed easily by the colonial marines. He was possibly so old that his exoskeleton had deteriorated into nothingness. Interestingly, a first-person perspective shooting game called Evolve has a playable monster character named Wraith, and the character's appearance seems unquestionably similar to the xenomorph Wraith. Egg-shaped alien. The egg-shaped alien presented in the 1990 arcade game Aliens was a peculiar boss because of its uniquely weird appearance. Despite the typical xenomorph head, the egg-shaped alien had two pairs of spidery limbs and had a notably and disproportionately large appendage in the shape of an egg which it carried on its back. Within this appendage, there were facehuggers that floated inside. The egg-shaped alien had a green hue to it but changed its color to orange upon receiving damage. This strange xenomorph would first pounce on a player if they came a bit too close to it, and then it would emit the facehugger balls to protect itself. However, the balls float in the air aimlessly and the player can easily destroy the balls. But the downside is that the egg-shaped alien keeps on creating these balls until it dies. Bull alien. As the name suggests, the bull alien or bull xenomorph had spawned inside a bull. Naturally, the resultant xenomorph took on the characteristics of the bull and developed a couple of horns on the head. It was primarily a blend of the runner and crusher xenomorphs. In that capacity, it was extremely quick, yet powerful. The bull alien was a large monster and could knock a military truck down with relative ease after rushing towards it to finally headbutt the vehicle. If you think that was a great feat, hear this. It could sustain a rocket blasting on its face without flinching even a muscle. However, it seems that fire indeed was its enemy. Much like cattle operate in herds, even the bull aliens preferred living amongst their own kind. Electric alien. The electric or static xenomorph also appeared in the 1990 video game Aliens that was developed by Konami. In the game, the protagonist Ellen Ripley or Dwayne Hicks reached the roof of Hadley's Hope after fighting a variety of xenomorphs along the way. They even survive a violent electrical storm. On the roof, the protagonists are forced to fight at least two of the electric xenomorphs. Once either one of them is defeated, the other electric xenomorph becomes more violent and potent and starts dealing more and more damage. Furthermore, it keeps charging toward the protagonist until the xenomorph or the protagonist is dead. The electric alien also has unusual traits, much like the other xenomorphs that appear in the game. While its basic physiology is that of a drone's, it has a purple hue to it and several appendages on its crest that resemble hair. Like other bosses of the game, the electric alien also changes its color to the usual orange. Symbiotic xenomorph. The symbiotic xenomorph is actually two xenomorphs living as one in a symbiotic relationship with each other. One can see a small rider xenomorph sitting on top of another xenomorph that's much larger and brutish. The rider sits between the shoulders of the brute xenomorph in a perched position, but for a xenomorph that small, it strangely possesses a head crest. This is a reference to Farah and Tor, who belong to an unidentified symbiotic race of beings. 3 was an extremely large xenomorph that appeared in Aliens Infiltrator and Aliens Fireteam Elite. 3 is also called Monica because of its host, Monica Enright. The terror that Monica could leave its victims with is clarified in the fact that the xenomorph managed to leave a man psychologically disturbed just because the poor guy had found himself in the xenomorph's close vicinity. But then some people believe he suffered the fate because he was close to the host, Monica. Nevertheless, the xenomorph was born on Parla Station in the year 2202. Parla Station was basically a classified research facility of Weyland-Yutani, and the facility had recently received a clutch of 12 eggs. It was here that 3 was born after rupturing Monica's chest. However, the xenomorph eggs and Monica had been previously exposed to the black goo, which altered 3's physiology and psychology. Despite being a drone, 3 could control and command other xenomorphs, which means that 3 was another super drone like Specimen 6. 3 had a humanoid skull within its translucent outer skin, but the creature was put down by Marines who showered it with heavy ballistic fire. The Sentry. After a hive gets a steady supply of hosts, its size increases rapidly. These huge hives need more protection because their area of dominance keeps increasing, and the protection of the xenomorph queen, her eggs, and the royal jelly becomes a subject of utmost importance. Essentially, the Sentries are a defensive force rather than an offensive one. The Sentry caste comes to the relief as the next evolutionary stage in a runner xenomorph's life. However, some people believe that Sentries are actually a sibling caste of the warrior xenomorphs. Nevertheless, Sentries are to runners what warriors are to drones, but much like warriors, the Sentries have a more rigid physiology and mesoskeleton, with well-developed dorsal spines, increased speed and dexterity, and limbs that are perfect for climbing and gripping. After a Sentry is force-fed raw metals and royal jelly for months at a stretch, the Sentry transforms into its next evolutionary stage. This stage 6 xenomorph is called a Charger. Infectoid. The Infectoids are not necessarily xenomorphs, but they anyway strive to fight for the safety of a xenomorph hive. Having appeared in the arcade games Aliens and Alien vs. Predator, the Infectoid is a living creature that somehow becomes a means to defend hives. They're not sedated or glued to walls, but are free to run in a trance similar to zombies. They attack nearby intruders and also alert xenomorph drones. In the off chance that a Yautja becomes mysteriously infected, the Yautja becomes practically insane and extremely violent and unpredictable. The human Infectoids have a strange blue tinge on their skin, and even infected Yautjas had the same skin color. Despite being alive, they don't have a sense of pain and develop several lesions on the skin that decays and leaves the Infectoid in an emaciated and rotting state. Not only do the Infectoids bite and scratch their victims, they're adept at using complex weaponry, which makes them extremely dangerous. Since they were the creation of an arcade game, they don't really have a lot of backstory, and we don't know if their infections are curable. Winged alien head. The Konami game had no lack for strange xenomorphs. One of these was a winged xenomorph head. Yep, you heard that right. It was simply a xenomorph head with wings and no body. The winged alien head kidnaps Newt, and Ripley has to make her way across a ventilation system to retrieve the little girl. It's here that the winged alien head confronts Ripley, and the flying xenomorph head also brings along a drone and a facehugger. It appears once again after the egg-shaped xenomorph is defeated. As the name suggests, the winged alien head was just a drone head with bat-like wings. It could fit into small spaces, and while some of them could be agile and quick flyers, the others were sluggish and flew aimlessly looking for hosts. Reaper Queen. Before I tell you about the Reaper Queen, let's take a minute to understand who or what exactly the Reapers are. Well, these are essentially alien humanoids that are green in color and possess disturbingly large teeth. They possess great strength, so much so that they can physically fight xenomorphs. But why do they fight xenomorphs? Well, the Reapers consume overmorph flesh and share the same hatred for xenomorphs as the Yautjas. But unlike the Yautjas, the Reapers hunt xenomorphs and devour the overmorphs because it's a need and not a sport. The Reaper Queen appeared in the 5th issue of the comic Alien Reapers. She had gestated inside a Reaper, which was clear from her exaggerated monstrosity and purple color. She's nothing like any queen we've spoken about so far. Not only was she enormously huge, she was equally powerful and intimidating. Palatine. The Palatine was an uber-powerful xenomorph drone that served as a guard to the Queen Mother. Also called Royal Guard and Elite Guard, the Palatine lives only on Xenomorph Prime. These xenomorphs are immensely large and have several extra features that most xenomorph drones lack. For instance, they have spines on both sides of their huge heads. Some Palatines may possess tusks as well. Only a few drones are selected for the precious task of protecting the Queen Mother and her royal jelly. As far as their size is concerned, they are as large as a typical xenomorph queen. In other words, the Palatines are queen-sized drones. An interesting aspect about them is that they don't engage in battle even when the hive is attacked, and only fling into action when the Queen Mother's safety becomes vulnerable. Vampire Queen. The Vampiric Queen appeared in the comics called Aliens Vampirella, the story of which centered around Vampirella. Although she was a vampire, she was one of the good guys and lived in peace with humans. She joined a few humans when they went inside a cave to investigate something suspicious. To their shock and horror, they found overmorphs in the cave, but they were too close to these overmorphs. Triggered by human proximity, the facehuggers came out of their slumber and attacked the humans as well as Vampirella. Taken by surprise, Vampirella was also impregnated by a facehugger. The facehugger that lashed onto her was a royal facehugger, and the chestburster that spawned inside her was a royal chestburster. Although everyone else died, Vampirella Vampirella survived because her vampiric powers helped her heal. The Vampire Queen resembles xenomorphs who gestated from humans, but she possesses a pair of wings. She's one of the few xenomorph queens that have the ability to fly. In the end, Vampirella and the Vampire Queen indulged in a high-octane battle. Curiously enough, the crossover comic between Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Aliens, we get to see another vampiric queen. The comic is titled Buffy the Vampire Slayer: In Space, No One Can Hear You Slay, and it makes for a must-read for every horror fan. Snake Alien. The Snake Alien hasn't been addressed in many comics, but it's still a mind-flustering hybrid xenomorph variant. It was initially designed by Kenner as part of their Alien series. Much like snakes, the Snake Alien had no limbs, which is probably because it spawned inside a snake and took the physical traits. Despite the lack of limbs, it was potent enough to launch scathing attacks on the victims using its extremely strong tail. We can see 2 mandibles on the Snake Alien's upper jaw. This can be attributed to the fangs of the snake it came out from. Much like the King Cobra, the Snake Alien also spits acid out on its victims to render them blind. Like most other toys from the Kenner Alien series, the Snake Alien found mention in the 1992 Dark Horse comic called Aliens: Night Strike. The comic revolves around Space Marines on Terraform 3, where they're faced with the Bull aliens. The group of Marines finds itself in a difficult position until an attack craft piloted by an unknown person came for help. They killed the Bull aliens as well as the Xenomorph Queen, but they were yet to meet the extremely vicious Snake aliens. In the same comic, we also witnessed the Flying Queen. If you wish to learn more about them, check out our video titled 13 Dreadful and Ghastly Xenomorph Queen Species Explored. Peek into the macabre world of xenomorphs. Rhino Alien. I don't know about scary, but the Rhino xenomorph was definitely an elegant one. The hybrid xenomorph variant has 2 horns above its nose and a huge muscular body. These features are obviously the result of the alien being spawned inside a rhinoceros. While the horns serve as offensive weapons, the creature's hardy armor protects it from almost any incoming ammunition. The beast was a massive ball of uncontrolled rage, and the only way it could be subdued was by sending it to cryosleep in sub-zero temperature. Given its stature and build, it's essentially a Praetorian or a warrior caste. However, one of the Rhino aliens served as a royal guard or a Praetorian in the comics Aliens: Ice Storm. One can say that these beasts are a mix between runners and crushers or bull aliens. Dog Queen. The Dog Queen appeared in the Alien 3 video game. She had spawned inside a dog, and that's how she got the name Dog Queen. Apart from this, there's precious little that can be said about her. But yes, she was definitely a rarity because she was a runner queen. Arachnoid. The Arachnoid appeared in the 1994 arcade game Alien vs. Predator. It's essentially a specialized purebred drone that molted to take an entirely new form and purpose. The beast was to serve as an ambush hunter for tougher targets. They lay curled up on the ground and patiently wait for a prey to approach them. An Arachnoid is so adept at this that it can wait for several days in this state until the desired moment to strike doesn't present itself. Furthermore, they have commendable jumping abilities, and that too, at extraordinary speed. This ability to move faster and jump higher is actually the result of strong leg muscles that's common to all arachnoids. Despite being just 1 stage above the drones, they have a crest similar to that of a xenomorph queen. T-Rex Xenomorph. The lore of the T-Rex Xenomorph goes back to the late Cretaceous period, which is the period when dinosaurs existed. A trilobite latched itself onto a T-Rex and led to the creation of the Xenorex. However, trilobites didn't really exist back during the Cretaceous period. So, how did one manage to infect a T-Rex? Well, the story includes some scientists, a trilobite, and a time machine. I think you can just connect the rest of the dots. The creature is never featured in any movie, comic, or game, but serves as a role-playing character. I think if the creature managed to roam around the Earth and reproduce, it would be the dominant species instead of humans. Harvey Dent, Poison Ivy, Joker, Scarecrow, Mr. Freeze hybrids. The Harvey Dent Xenomorph hybrid was created by Dr. Catherine Fortune, who also created several other hybrids by using the DNAs of Arkham Asylum's inmates. But there was much more to Catherine than what met the naked eye. The woman was on an expedition at Mount Erebus in 1928 during the time she was exploring Antarctica. But poor Catherine got ambushed by a facehugger, which planted a chestburster embryo within her. However, the chestburster never really spawned inside her to full maturity, because Catherine had a mild case of dry leprosy. This retarded growth of a xenomorph within her body caused her physiology to enhance. She now had better reflexes and instincts, in addition to becoming stronger and fitter. Furthermore, her lifespan outnumbered that of any regular human being, so much so that even during the 21st century, she looked just as she did in 1928. Catherine realized the changes that the chestburster inside her had brought and refused all attempts to have it removed. During the 21st century, she secretly worked for a global cabal of industrialists religious zealots, and politicians who were struggling to find a way to eliminate superheroes. Naturally, she used her own mutated DNA and spliced them with the DNA of several Arkham Asylum inmates like Harvey Dent, Joker, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, and Scarecrow to create spliced xenomorph hybrids. These hybrids were entirely sapient beings that were capable of speech, military tactics, and weapon use. However, the hybrids couldn't stand their ground when they faced Batman. So, that was our exhaustive list of all xenomorphs that ever appeared in movies, comics, games, and other media. Do let me know in the comments if you think I missed something. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.